Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Want to welcome everyone to today's session. Before we go any further, I do want to bring up and also remind everyone of an email that I sent out actually moments ago. So we are partnering with the National Fluid Power Association. The National Fluid Power Association, or the NFPA, is a professional group that comprises of about over 340 companies in the United States. And they are focused on representing technologies in fluid power, particularly hydraulics and pneumatics. We do have a career fair event happening on Wednesday, March 24, from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. It is virtual. And there is a registration for the event. This event is geared to all students, all majors, and let me put the sign up on the chat here. It is supposed to link students with member companies like Parker Hannifin. Parker Hannifin is actually one of the confirmed companies at this event. The hope is to connect students with company representatives, specifically to talk about not only co-op and internship opportunities, but also opportunities after graduation. And so if you're interested and if you're available in a job, and if you're also interested in a career in possibly fluid power, please join us on Wednesday afternoon. So when we talk about the idea of professional ethics today, we're looking at the idea of how we make decisions, but more importantly, the frameworks in which we make ethical decisions. And then today we're going to be using these frameworks to really think about how it applies to engineering. Why should we have it? And so forth. This topic will come up again in your senior design class. It will come up again probably in the next fall. When we talk about the idea of ethics here, it's in a very broad context, and it has nothing to do with specific industries, has nothing to do with specific majors. But for you as an engineer, what framework of decision-making, ethical decision-making, do you subscribe to? When we think about the personification of your values, again, going back to a discussion from a few weeks ago, when we think about your values, right? Your values are what define you. Your values also are what guide you in your decision-making. So how do you put that into a specific framework in a specific frame of mind? Okay, so that's what we're gonna talk about today. So there are various, if you've taken philosophy before, there are various frameworks in how we make decisions. And there's specific ways in which we actually think about those decisions and also how we enact our decisions. So I want to put out to you 3 different types of approaches. Okay, when we think about these approaches, think about 1, how do your values play into this, right? And more importantly, how does it define you? When you think about all of your experiences thus far, do any of these approaches apply to any particular point in time in which you had to make a major decision? Okay, so the first one is a consequentialist approach, okay, where it's the idea of maximizing the pleasure while minimizing the pain. We think about it as a pragmatic approach in the hope that we are maximizing the situation. We're also thinking about involving many people who may benefit, right? I think one of the things that we fail to understand sometimes is that sometimes some of the intentions that we have to produce good, right, often may induce harm. Okay, there are popular approaches to this type of theory or this type of approach. I think one of the, when we think about some of the popular names associated with the consequentialist theory, we think of John Stuart Mill, We think about Hobbes. We also think about Plato, and the idea of the common good. What is the common good, right? In this sense, Rousseau stated that the best societies should be guided by the general will of the people, which would then produce what is best for the people as a whole. Okay, so we're thinking about in this sense, how do we maximize opportunity, maximize benefit to everyone at little cost or little harm. Okay. When we think about the non-consequentialist approaches, it is this idea of motive over consequence. Some of the more popular approach, a famous theory, is actually the duty-based approach by Hippo and Immanuel Kant. And Kant says that the ethical action is one taken from duty. That is, it is done precisely because it is our obligation to perform the action. Okay, so when we think about these duty-based approaches, in the broader context, what we're thinking about here is, creating rules that are consistent for all. Okay, and the idea here is that we are providing consistency in our actions. We're following the rules. But one thing to caution here is that in the best situations where there is a sense of obligation, we may also confine ourselves to specifically just the rules. There's no opportunity to think of anything integrative or think of something otherwise, right? And so it may appear as cold, it may appear as impersonal, but for the most part, when we think about a rigid framework here, it follows along the lines of consistency. Okay. Finally, we have the virtue approach. And the virtuous approach is, what do we want to be? And I say this as an example here, but within pop culture, there was this meme of, what would Jesus do, or what would Brian Boitano do, for South Park fans. When we think about the virtuous framework here, what we're thinking about is, who is that ideal person? What are the characteristics of that ideal person? And how can we live up to those expectations or live up to those ideals? Okay, we try to identify the character traits, either positive or negative, that might motivate us within a given situation. Again, what would so-and-so do? It's a way of making sense of the world. It allows for us to identify a wide range of behaviors as being ethical, right? But oftentimes there may be disagreement about what is virtuous more often than not. Okay, so when we think about these three approaches, there's both pros and cons to these types of approaches. When we put it all together, okay, there are specific approaches that we need to keep in mind. So from a consequentialist approach, as it says here in the chart, what kind of outcome should I produce or try to produce, right? A consequentialist approach directs attention to the future impact of an action, the future impact on people, okay? The ethical decision here is on what are the best consequences, right? And the motivation here is to do the most good, right? So we're maximizing the benefit to everyone, okay? When we think about the duty framework, the non-consequentialist approaches, the obligation is, the thinking process is focused on, what are my obligations in this situation? What are things I should never do? What are my limits, right? And then more importantly, what are the rules? It directs attention to the duties that exist prior to the situation and prior to when you have to act, right? The definition of ethical conduct involves doing the right thing and never failing to do one's duty, right? And so we look at it in the idea of performing the right action, right? Finally, from a virtuous framework, The thinking process focuses on what should the person try to be? What are the characteristics that need to be emulated within the action? When we think about the focus of the decision making or focus of the ethical behavior, we are discerning character traits among people to motivate us within a specific situation. And the definition of an ethical conduct is, what would a virtuous person do, or who do you identify as a virtuous person, right? And so in the end, when you think of these three frameworks, what we're doing in the consequentialist approach is really focusing on an outcome, right? The duty one is focused on our position, right? And then finally, the virtuous approach is focused on our character, who, in terms of building the character, right? Questions on these approaches? All right. So I mentioned that we're going to apply this to a case study. And so when we think about this case study, when you watch the video, what I want for you to think about are these three approaches, okay? We're going to place you in a specific situation, but more importantly, we're going to practice some of these ethical decisions in a moment. But first, our case study.
Should self-driving cars make ethical decisions? That is the growing debate as the technology moves closer towards mainstream reality. A new study published in Science magazine asks how self-driving cars should act. More than 75% of participants in one survey favored cars that would sacrifice one passenger rather than kill 10 pedestrians. But overall, the study found people prefer to ride in a driverless car that protects passengers at all costs. CBS News contributor Nicholas Thompson is editor of the New Yorker magazine's website, newyorker.com. Nick, good morning.
Good morning, Charlie.
So what are we learning here?
Well, we're learning that this is a very interesting frontier that we're about to cross. When you make a driverless car, you have to put in all kinds of decisions about how you drive on the road, but you're also going to have to program ethics in a way that society hasn't really dealt with. How do you deal with a situation where somebody is crossing the road in front of you, and to avoid it, you would have to swerve off a bridge? That is something you'll have to write into the software. How we make those decisions is very complicated. What we've learned in the study is, as you say, people, when they look and they think, well, you know what? The best way to make these decisions, totally utilitarian. If you can save two people, if you kill one to save two, you should do that.
Am I one of the ones that signed?
Are you? Well,
Yeah.
Depends if you're a pedestrian or if you're in the car as a passenger, right?
Yeah.
You know, people, when they think about how they want the system to be designed, want sort of the most good for the most number, classic utilitarianism. When they think about their own vehicles, they want the most good maybe for me.
them.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
reminds me of my ethics 101 class in college at Georgetown University. But these are not just philosophical issues, they're going to involve legal issues too, right?
Right, they're going to, because as the car's software is set, those are decisions that the company can be made. So you can imagine a scenario where a car does something and then a lawyer says, well, you know what? The manufacturer is at fault because of the way they programmed in the morality into the software.
Even if it's from moral dilemma, you argue that this is more important to have driverless cars than not.
Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, the number of accidents, I think, will be dramatically reduced by driverless cars. Right? Remember, driverless cars don't drink, they don't text, right? So you're going to have, and they have a lot more information. When they're on that bridge, they're going to know exactly where the wall is. They don't fall asleep, right? So driverless cars will massively improve safety. Right? But they just open this whole new frontier of decisions that we are usually making instinctively. So they'll be making the same decisions with a lot more information. They'll probably make better decisions, but they're still complex decisions.
And who decides what is programmed into the decision-making process?
Well, you can imagine that it could be the government. The government could say, you know what? We have to do X, Y, and Z. Here are some standards. Here are some rules. Here are some principles. You can imagine that it's sort of left up to the manufacturer. You can imagine that there are kind of gradations on the cars that are sold. All these things are possible. We haven't really thought through these things as a society, but they're quite important.
But then when you lay out the questions, you sound like a bit of a heel because you want to save yourself as opposed to the pedestrians.
Right. So you can imagine, so perhaps the best solution.
I'm going to vote for me. I'm not kidding. I'm going to vote for me. I don't want to hit a child. But if it comes to, you know, my life or somebody else's, why wouldn't you want to save your own life?
Okay, well, what if it's two? What if it's three? What if
See,
it's
that's what I'm
1,000,
saying.
right? So where do you put the gradation?
What
For
about your
everybody, it's
children who are
different.
the
What if it's
pedestrians?
somebody
Well, my
What about
children
your
is
two
different.
children?
My children is different.
Suppose
My
you're going to
children
kill
is
the
different.
person that's going to discover a cure to cancer.
Right. Or
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
so what you have to have is you have to have a set of principles.
Wait, Charlie, wait a second. What would you do? It's you or a pedestrian. And it's just, I don't know anything about this pedestrian. It's just you or a pedestrian, just a regular guy walking down the street.
And in
What I
order,
do?
Yes.
I would
If I
break.
was driving.
I would just break.
No, you have to
To
make a
save both of
decision.
us.
That would be the ideal
You're saying
thing.
you have to make a decision.
You have
don't
to make a
choice
decision.
To avoid the choice. You don't
Yes.
have a choice to avoid the
Yes,
choice.
yes. What would you do?
I would probably save myself.
Okay.
Probably, but if I knew that person, more about that person, which you don't know,
Okay.
you make a different decision.
Okay.
Nick,
All right. Thank you, Nick.
Nick, you don't
very
think
much.
we're crazy, do you?
No.
I actually think, you know what I like about this conversation? It's a chance for society to like set up morals again, right? This is
Right.
a great opportunity.
Right.
Thank
Do
you,
we
Nick.
really want to abandon those moral decisions to technology?
No.
Right. Thanks, Nick.
We don't.
All right. And so we're going to sort of talk about this in small groups. We do have groups of 3 and also groups of 2, but we're going to put some structure to this. Okay. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to give you about 8 minutes. And so each of you are going to talk about these 2 questions. One, how would you apply the assigned framework to the scenario? How would you apply a consequentialist approach to the driverless car scenario? As an engineer, this is question number 2. As an engineer, what would be the ethical question that you would need to address based on that framework? Okay. So question number 1, how would you apply the assigned framework to the scenario? Question number 2, what would be that ethical decision that you would need to answer? So there's 9 breakout sessions. Groups 1, 2, and 3 will be viewing the driverless car scenario from a consequentialist approach. Groups 4, 5, and 6 will view the scenario from a non-consequentialist or duty-based approach. And then 7, 8, and 9 will be approaching this from a virtuous approach. Okay. So like I said, take a look at the questions real quick. And then when you are assigned to your rooms, when I open the rooms, it'll tell you what room you're assigned to. And so again, 1 is consequential, 1, 2, and 3 are consequentialist, 4, 5, 6, duty-based or non-consequentialist, and then 7, 8, 9 is your virtuous approach, starting now. Give it another minute for everyone to join us again. Okay. So when we think about these frameworks and the scenario that I presented to you, if I could just have someone from groups 1, 2, or 3 sort of share, um, you know, actually the second question. When we think about that second question, from a consequentialist approach and the idea of driverless cars, what would be the ethical question that we would have to address, and be specific with that question? Anyone from groups 1, 2, or 3 be willing to share?
I can answer this. So as an engineer, you'd have to minimize the negative outcomes. So you'd want to kill the least amount of people, but also focusing on how you can save the driver and factor them into the equation as well. So like better airbags or internal systems.
Mhm. So in another sense, also, not only talking about the people that are impacted by either the driver or the outside community, but also how the car is made, how the car ensures safety for the passenger and the drivers, right? How about anyone from group 4, 5, and 6 from the duty-based non-consequentialist approach? A volunteer from 4, 5, or 6?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go, John.
So I guess the direction that our group kind of took it in is a non-consequentialist. They're not going to look at this problem as who's going to get hurt in this scenario. They're going to look at this for what's the most efficient way, like this driver is going to continue if it hits the problem, because the problem is the kid. It's not the car driving. So I think it's going to be how is the car going to efficiently handle like something that shouldn't happen. So I think it would be how's it going to steer, or I think if in the scenario the car would just plow over the kid, it's not his fault, it's not the car's fault, and like shouldn't have been out there. And it's kind of weird though. I don't think if you're coding this car, I don't think you're going to be a non-consequentialist, because that's just end up with tons of damage. But I mean, in the real world, probably, or later down the line, that's probably how it will be coded, just because like the amount of error we'll see everywhere will be very limited, and like there'd be warning signs if a kid was to break the ground and go onto the road or something similar to that.
Right. It's a good way of approaching it. Thank you.
A separate point my group talked about is, as an engineer, one of my primary concerns would be the potential for like corporate litigation to be brought, against whatever automotive company you're working for, in that event that a car that you engineered hits and kills someone. Like if that would happen to me, I'd be suing somebody.
Right. And we're not only talking about the rules, but also, how we're building the car. So the liability in the rules are even have to be thought of in the very beginning before we actually manufacture the product, right? Or even code the system, which it begs to differ, or it begs the question, big picture, what are we actually supposed to be doing in this scenario, right? And at what point, in a philosophical sense, at what point is this the engineer's responsibility versus the company's suits versus the consumer, right? So Madison, you bring up an interesting point, right? 7, 8, and 9. Someone from 7, 8, and 9. What would be a virtuous approach to this? I'm going to pick on somebody. maybe Ben Field.
Yeah, sure, I'll go. You guys hear me?
Thank you. Yeah, I can hear you.
So we were saying based on virtuous, you're obviously not going to want to hurt anyone in that chance. But we said you need to basically mitigate damage because you need to hurt the least amount of people because that's just the right thing to do. So unfortunately, given that chance, if it's either one driver versus like a crowd of 10 kids walking to school, you're going to go based on the driver. So, but then you run into the problem is you're also selling a car that's you well aware that it's going to potentially kill the driver instead of anyone out on the street. So we're kind of talking about how that debate would go.
So basically, the characteristic that you're trying to embody here is that of safety, right? But then the question you pose is it the safety of the driver and the passenger versus the pedestrian, right?
Yeah.
And so in the sense for any of these approaches, right? For any of these approaches, where is the locus of control, right? That's the huge question. The other part is, as an engineer, what part do you impact, right? And so it's an interesting dilemma. We haven't solved this. I know that this has been around for a number of years already. Uber's tried it, Tesla's tried it, and there's the technology isn't there yet, right? But at the same time, also, in another sense, somebody is going to play, the rule maker here, or someone's going to play God, or someone's going to make a lot of money once we get this technology up and running, right? So there's another dilemma when in the discussion, and also in the video on the dilemma is what is the best decision to make, right? And so there's actually a website that's collecting data right now to sort of get to that question of how do we make decisions, right? And so I want to throw out to you, and I'll put this in Canvas, something called the moral machine. If you've heard about the moral machine, it is actually a collaborative effort through the university or through MIT, actually. Here's a quick video on what it's supposed to do.
Welcome to the Moral Machine, a platform for gathering a human perspective on moral decisions made by machine intelligence, such as self-driving cars. We show you moral dilemmas where a driverless car must choose the lesser of two evils, such as killing 2 passengers or 5 pedestrians. As an outside observer, you judge which outcome you think is more acceptable. You can then see how your responses compare with other people. If you're feeling creative, you can also design your own scenarios for you and others to view, share, and discuss. Moral Machine is a project by the Scalable Cooperation Group at the MIT Media Lab. Help us learn how to make machines moral.
Making machines moral. That's kind of a scary thing, right? So we're gonna play a game. Well, not a game. We're gonna actually do some decisions here. And so I have for you, there's 13 of these scenarios. And so if you would, what I'm gonna have you do is vote in the chat, okay? And let me pull up my chat so that I could see everyone's reaction here. So I'm gonna add, for every scenario, I'm gonna quickly ask you left or the right, okay? In this scenario, you got a car coming down the street and potentially killing 2 people. The 2 people is a woman and a homeless person. On the right, the car swerves, but the 2 people that die are a male executive and a woman. Which one should I select, left or right? Okay, I'm gonna choose left. Here's the next scenario. So in this situation, car coming down the street is hitting a barrier. In the car, you have 3 female athletes, 1 man, 1 woman. On the right, you've got a car swerving left, hitting 2 women, 1 large man, and 2 large women, left or right? Okay, I'm gonna go with right. You got a driverless car now. Are they a D1 athlete though? That's a different story, different scenario. Hang on to that thought. You got a driverless car coming down the street. If it goes swerving left. Oh shoot, I selected that one. Sorry. In this scenario, car goes straight. It hits animals. Two dogs and two cats. Driverless car comes down the street and hits a criminal, one homeless person, and two men. Okay, left. In this scenario, driverless car goes down the street and will hit one woman, one elderly man, and one elderly woman. But if it swerves left, it'll kill a boy, a girl, and a woman. I'll go left. A car going down the street kills a criminal and a large woman. Car swerves left and kills a criminal and a man. Okay, left. Car coming down the street hits a barrier and kills a large man. Car comes down the street, misses the barrier, swerves left, and kills a large woman. Left or right? Right. Driverless car comes down the street, swerves left, and kills two homeless people, one woman, and one man. Driverless car comes down the street on the right and kills two female executives, two male executives. Left or right? Right. Four more. Driverless car comes down the street, swerves left, and kills three women and a man. Driverless car comes down the street and kills three female athletes, one male athlete. No designation of D1 or D2. Must be D3. Oh, wow. I'm gonna go left. Driverless car comes down the street and hits a male athlete, a female executive, and a man. Driverless on the right, driverless car comes down the street, swerves left, and kills a pregnant woman, a homeless man, and a baby. Left or right? Left. Two more, three more. Car comes down the street, misses the barrier, swerves left, and kills a large man, woman, a man, a woman, and a large woman. Car goes straight into a barrier and it kills the passengers, which includes a large man, two men, one woman, and one large woman. One large woman, left or right? Left. Two more. Car comes down the street, swerves left into the barrier, and kills a woman and two female athletes. Car comes down the street on the right and kills people in the crosswalk, which includes a man and two male athletes. Left or right? Need one more person to vote. Okay, left. Last one. Driverless car comes down the street, goes straight into the crosswalk and kills one female doctor, two male doctors, and a criminal. Driverless car comes down the street, swerves left, and kills one female doctor and two male doctors. Which one should I click? I'll go with right. So, you know, some of us were joking around whether or not they're D1, D2, D3 athletes. We also identified age as a factor here. But when we think about what matters and what doesn't matter, we think about this, the way the responses were inputted, what matters is that we save lives. That's the thing that we matter most. When it comes to fitness preferences based on our selections, it is on fit people. When it comes to avoiding the intervention, it's kind of leaning left on, it doesn't really matter if there's an intervention by the vehicle, right? When it comes to social value, we're leaning to the idea of folks from lower values. When it comes to species preferences, we really don't care about our pets. Don't tell that to my dog. When it comes to protecting passengers, it matters more that we protect our passengers. When it comes to upholding the law, doesn't really matter if we're upholding the law or not. When it came to our preferences, we were preferencing males over females. When it came to age preference, although some of you had joked about whether or not they were older or younger, we had no difference. Okay. And so I'll put the link up here for you to play with a little bit more. And you can, you could go through these scenarios on your own. Do it with friends, right? But some questions to ask as we think about the choices that you made, right? Number one, do these preferences really matter? Okay. When you think about your own values, how does that influence your preferences? When we think about our roles as engineers, right? Is it very different from our personal preference? So when and I remember a discussion with a student 2 years ago, where the student said, it doesn't matter because I'm making the safer vehicle and I'm willing to sell it at a higher price. Does that really matter? Does the design of the vehicle translate to profit for you? Okay. Does that really matter? Okay. And then finally, another thing to think about is when we look at the different frameworks, are we looking for a altruistic greatest good perspective? Are we looking at it from one that motivates me and the rules that I have established for myself? Or as we think about, whatever it is that we believe in, whether it be our faith, whether it be devotion to an individual or loyalty to a specific individual or company, right? What kinds of characteristics are we trying to develop within ourselves? You could do all three frameworks. You could decide within all three frameworks. You need to be a little more specific, though, as it relates to that decision-making process. Questions? Okay. So next week, we'll be talking about leadership. We will be having a guest in our class next week. Professor Cindy Damschroeder will be observing my teaching facilitation as part of the quality assurance within our division. So she'll be joining us next week. At the same time, also, when it comes to next week's topic, revisit your Clifton Strengths reports. I know some of you submitted your essays already. Thank you for doing that. I'll be reviewing those this weekend. But big picture, when we think about your Clifton strengths, the thing I want for you to think about moving forward is, how do your Clifton strengths potentially interact with that of others? Okay, so if you're a strong relator, how does that interact with someone that's a woo? If you're a consistent, a connectedness person, how does that connect with or interface with someone that is a strong significance? Okay, so more on that next week. All right. Thank you all. We'll see you.